The Ministry of Timelines bears no official responsibility for the content of this research. We record the Belbos Timeline to have diverged 4,300 years before the present day. Contamination of this timeline makes it difficult to determine if prior divergence also occurred, but the Ministry continues to investigate this possibility. This record has been compiled from contemporary sources extracted directly from the timeline, though it does include some assumptions on the part of the Ministry. At the end of the Second World War, the human race began a program of prolific nuclear weapons tests. The impact of a nuclear detonation is detectable from light years away. Unfortunately, in this case, they were observed by a power whose rigidity was the only force delaying the inevitable for humanity. Had the human race known, they might have spent their time very, very differently. As the 21st century marched onwards, the Earth matured into a modern, stable world. The human race began to fix the problems of their past: war, disease, climate change. As the people of Earth finally began to cooperate and reason, as humanity built for a common future, they arrived. On October 3rd, 2052, alien vessels entered low Earth orbit without warning. They loomed high above the world for 30 days, silently. The ships ignored every communication attempt made by the people below. Then, without warning, on the 31st day after their arrival, they began to broadcast. They called out on every frequency and used every language. Their message was clear.
Welcome. After your long night in the dark, we are here. You are our wayward sheep. You are our children. Welcome.
The response from Earth was mixed. Some celebrated, some were terrified. There were parties and there were riots. A hasty session of the United Nations was called. The human race welcomed the aliens down to the surface of their world. Due to the haste of the reception, most world leaders were unable to attend. They ended up being very thankful for that. The official first contact was an unmitigated catastrophe. Contemporary evidence clearly shows that the aliens assassinated the Secretary General within minutes of their arrival, apparently due to a perceived slight, daring to speak out of turn. Casualties were minimal, but did include a large proportion of the diplomats of Earth. Their deaths were broadcast live to the planet, and this footage remains the foundation of our understanding of this event.
You are our children, but rudeness will not be tolerated. Let these humans be an example. Do not interrupt your parents.
They went on to claim that humanity would be dragged, kicking and screaming, out of their nuclear crisis. They would not be allowed to destroy themselves. They would be taught proper manners and etiquette. They would grow up. The governments of Earth did not take too kindly to the perceived alien aggression. Most nations made formal declarations of war within minutes of the assassination of the Secretary General. A smaller number of those nations fired their entire nuclear arsenal at the aliens above. Intercontinental ballistic missiles cut arcs into the sky as the planet held its breath. Unfortunately for humanity, their full nuclear response had little effect on the alien ships in orbit. The alien point defense lasers knocked every missile out of the sky with ease, long before they posed any danger of detonating close to an alien ship. It was a turkey shoot. There was one exception to this. A stray missile managed to collide with an alien troop transport above the historically named Sweden. The nuclear explosion caused the main energy reactor of the ship to detonate. This wiped out all life within a few hundred kilometers and blanketed the entire peninsula in radioactive fallout. The eagle-eyed among you may have realized that I am referring to the Desolus, an area that remained uninhabitable for generations afterwards. Across the rest of the planet, alien ground forces disembarked and attacked any humans that actively resisted occupation. Apart from the one Pyrrhic victory above the Desolace, the Earth's defenders were totally unsuccessful in repulsing the aliens. Even a single alien soldier, armed and wreathed in a protective force field, proved untouchable. Imagine, if you can, the feelings of those early human soldiers, tucked tightly into their metal tanks, firing cannon, that is, kinetic projectiles propelled by use of chemical explosives at distant alien targets. You are confident in the power and supremacy of your technology, expectant that after the smoke clears from your assault, you will have vanquished the enemy, a lone alien soldier. But then, when visual contact returns, the alien looks entirely unperturbed and unharmed. You level shot after shot, having no effect. And when you, trapped in your metal box, your metal tomb, finally gained its attention, you would have mere moments before the alien would stab out with ungodly weapons of fire and light, blasting you into atoms. This engagement scenario was repeated over and over across the world, on land, at sea, and in the air. Every time human forces engaged the aliens, they failed to do anything except destroy the world around them and inflict horrific civilian casualties. There are innumerous surviving records that align with this account of the invasion. One by one, the human governments of the world surrendered or collapsed to the encroaching alien forces. Those that did not fight, that respected their elders, were left entirely alone and unmolested. They began to try and pick up the pieces. Hundreds of millions died from starvation, disease, and a lack of proper sanitation. Though the aliens were judicious in their use of force, they were not cruel or sadistic. Those areas that were destroyed by human weaponry and now fell under alien occupation were rebuilt. The people living there were provided emergency food and shelter. If you did not strike against the aliens, or behave rudely, it turned out you had nothing to fear from them. By the end of the year 2052, no human nation remained. There were still pockets of resistance, of course. Those that did not die in the initial conflict fled deep into mountains, jungles, and forests, supported by the dying embers of human civilization and their militaries. From here they began a campaign of resistance against the invaders. Over time, this loosely organised militia became publicly known as the Anti-Alien Front. The AAF carried out constant attacks and harassment against the occupation and its infrastructure. Under the ever-watchful eye of the aliens, the humans living under alien occupation formed new governments and political structures. Alien legal customs were enforced. Careful not to lose their power and always prepared for new opportunities, leaders of industry and commerce managed to hold on to their wealth and status. The richest of the old world not only retained their power, but by ingratiating themselves with the aliens, they began to expand and cement it. For who else would the world turn to when the aliens requested that Earth begin to industrialize and export new alien goods? From the surviving political class of old Earth and these titans of industry, a new aristocratic elite emerged. By 2066, the AAF had become more and more successful at disrupting human life and human operations. To clarify, the only noticeable effect the AAF had was killing innocent human civilians and disrupting human life. This was an unexpected boon that the alien propagandists exploited relentlessly. Alien technology still proved unassailable to human attacks. Their garrisons, set up in the name of protecting human freedoms, were totally untouched by the AAF aggression. In response, and under strict instruction by their alien overlords, the collaborative governments of Earth set up the Peace Corps, a human secret police force armed and instructed by the aliens to root out, arrest, and disarm the AAF. With public opinion rapidly turning against the AAF, the Peace Corps succeeded in their mission within the span of a few years. This left the collaborative governments as the only expression of human civilization on Earth. Mere decades after the aliens' arrival, Earth had crystallized into a new world. To streamline human-alien relations and follow strict alien protocols, a human was appointed to provide a direct link between the alien civilization, the hegemony of Belbos, and the myriad governments of Earth. This is the officially recognised start of the Sol Satrapy. Crowned as satrap in 2084, Martina Ardiles, an Argentinian native, reigned as military governor of the entire human race. She answered to none but her alien overlords. As the years passed, people forgot. Education was rigidly controlled and prescribed by the aliens. Through education, social programs, and a network of indoctrination protocols, human children were quickly introduced to alien technology, culture, and ideas. The human place in the great familial web of the hegemony was taught and believed. For the humans, along with other satrap races, were the lost children of Belbos. According to the hegemony, the threads of their stories weaved into a great tapestry stretching back millennia. Within a single generation, the culture and technology gap was closed. It is essential to note at this time that hegemony society was held together by a set of texts that, to an external observer, would seem to hold a significance bordering on the religious. These documents acted as a philosophical guide, a legal framework for the hegemony, and a strict schedule for the future of the entire civilization. The closest translation we have for a title to these works was the elucidated reference primer Dominion System of Antecedent Proper Polite Originators, but away from Belbos it was more commonly referred to as the Parent Protocols. By 2088, after rebuilding human society under the direction of the Parent Protocols, the industrial base of Earth was fully turned over to the making of weapons and the construction of warships, all of which were alien in design, but their intricacies and workings were now understood by humans. In 2104, conscription was enforced by the satrap. All human adults would serve a term of no less than 5 years in the Imperial military. Humans were taken, used to fill armies and crew warships, as pilots and frontline soldiers. For they were part of the great family of the hegemony, and they had their place in the hierarchy, their role to fulfill. Used as shock troops across the Empire, human soldiers put down rebellions and settled border disputes on unknown worlds with unknown peoples. They were model soldiers in the Imperial military. On Earth, every victory, no matter how small, was celebrated and held up as further proof of humanity's destiny as the bulwark of Belbos. However, behind closed doors, there were some who did not forget old Earth. They remembered the true history and the disparate ideals of their ancestors, not the whitewashed alien ideas force-fed at the whim of their alien overlords. Whilst our research indicates that these individuals were not organised into networks, it is believed that those most likely to harbour anti-hegemony ideas were those with links to the AAF. Finally, in 2178, human officers were given the command of an entire alien armada. They were tasked with welcoming a newly discovered alien race into the Imperial fold. By finally accepting their place in the hegemony and following the dogma of the Parent Protocols, humanity invaded their first alien world. Humanity's fleet waited for 30 days above the planet. On the 31st day, after not receiving the proper response from the terrified natives, they descended onto the unprepared planet. Humans strutted across the surface of this world. Armed with alien weapons and wreathed in alien force fields, they were untouchable. Quickly, they brought its population to heel, only killing those that attacked them or refused to obey the niceties of the protocols. To the officers of the fleet, they realised that they had become the fist of oppression, though the rank and file serving in those armies called it a mercy. They believed they were bringing the gift of civilization to the indigenous. As the 22nd century drew to a close, events were unfolding on the distant imperial capital that would have seismic implications for the people of Earth. Upon the rise of the 51st Emperor Shaddam VI, they were bequeathed new freedoms, counter to the strict dogma of the protocols. All of the satrapies were, hundreds of years before the proper preordained time. As the throne moved counter to the protocol, the hegemony became mired in political infighting and a tumultuous succession crisis. And so it was that the satrapies experienced their first taste of freedom and self-determination. Would the people of Earth regain their liberty, or would the hegemony reign supreme? This concludes our analysis of the pre-explorative age for humanity in this timeline. Please refer to the next chapter of this report for further details on the Belbos Timeline. The Ministry of Timelines bears no official responsibility for the content of this research. We conclude that the Purge of Pythria was a pivotal branch point in the Belbos Timeline. Advise further examination of the slaughter on Pythria. This will be necessary to achieve a complete view of this timeline. What really drove the hegemony into such drastic action? The TSS Lagrange was not the first human starship to leave the Sol system, nor was it the most advanced. But on April 11, 2200, the science ship Lagrange was the first manned ship to travel into the depths of space at the instruction of a human government and flying a human flag. For generations, Alpha Centauri, the closest star system to Earth, had remained just out of reach for humanity. But with the new freedoms bequeathed by an alien emperor, the trinary star system that had inspired human imagination for so long was entered and explored. The survey of Alpha Centauri revealed a vast system filled with untapped potential, and amongst the new worlds, a mystery was uncovered. Alpha Centauri 5 was a desolate world and, to the scientists that surveyed the planet's shock, was locked into a bleak, nuclear winter. The survey team found no natural causes for the high levels of radiation detected on the world they called Nadam. Further examination would be required to illuminate this enigma. Regarded as the greatest discovery, however, was a planet capable of sustaining human life. On Earth, the celebration at this news was tinged with unease. The satrap used Nadam to show that the Belbos were utterly correct to invade Earth, that the human race had stood on the brink of nuclear self-annihilation, and without their parental guidance, humanity would now be extinct. As the Sol satrapy took its first official steps into a vast unknown galaxy, their neighbours, their siblings under Belbos, the Inac satrapy, made their first unsupervised contact with Earth. Both nations were painfully aware that humans were responsible for their subjugation and inclusion into the hegemony. This meant that the Bronterok's clumsy attempts at diplomacy were overly indulged by Earth. Had the Bronterok of Inac been more familiar with human communication, their behaviour would have been considered rude and completely inexcusable. Had the humans understood the Bronterok better, their hostile intentions would have been clear. At the decree of the satrap Geoffrey Hammond, the supreme military governor of the human race, an emergency shift in the economic policy of Earth was undertaken. His government embarked on a spending program of titanic proportions as an emergency colonization project began, and resources were poured into the construction of a gigantic colony ship. Publicly, official news outlets spoke of settling the new world discovered in Alpha Centauri to safeguard the interests of Earth and Belbos. Within the court of the satrap, it was thought that even if the hegemony took back the freedoms they had recently bestowed, the human race would never again be trapped on a single planet. As part of this intense spending campaign, the slums of Earth were cleared, their populations pressed into working the new factories and shipyards. The new colony was not the only priority of the satrapy, as, alongside the colonization efforts, much of the increased industrial output was diverted to the navy and used to build warships, for the protection of Earth and the hegemony they served. On June 6, 2203, the aptly named TSS Unity touched down on the virgin world of Alpha Centauri 3, ever after called New Netherlands, proudly named in honour of one of the preeminent naval powers of old Earth. The colonists on this world carried the hopes and dreams of all those they had left behind on Earth. Many hoped for a fresh start away from the ever-watchful eyes of the hegemony of Belbos. Unfortunately, the gaze of Belbos would not be so easily obscured, and representatives from the hegemony were already waiting on the planet when the colony ship touched down. The emergency project to colonize a new planet left the economy of Earth on the brink of total collapse. In order to prevent these spiralling deficits running out of control, the government, at the behest of its aristocratic court, searched for aid from the other satrapies of the hegemony. The Imperial Razax estate, a legally separate prefecture and most ancient of the hegemony's children, was more than happy to help the beleaguered governments of Earth. Not well versed in imperial diplomatic protocol and unaware of the reputation or nature of the estate, the Sol satrapy struck a Faustian bargain. The human diplomats, who were in reality admirals of the navy, were entirely taken in by the gregarious promises of the plebeians. The estate would step in to guarantee Earth's national debt for a very modest fee. Buried deep in the fine print, the plebeians included an abhorrent schedule of mounting payments, well outside the value of any assistance given to humanity. In 2206, riding high on the apparent influx of riches from the trade deal, the corrupt elites used tax money to fund new and expanded noble estates. Tax money that should have been spent on increasing refined alloy production, essential for the construction of warships, was instead spent on building lavish palaces for the already ludicrously wealthy. The Admiralty protested fiercely against this misappropriation of state resources, but their protestations fell on decadent, deaf ears. Only 4 months after the payments from the Imperial Razax estate had begun, they dried up. Plebeian lawyers and accountants descended on the earth. They pulled out arcane references from the hegemony's great texts, the parent protocols, that showed that the estate had no further obligation to continue payments to humanity. The trickle of assistance dried up. The markets crashed. For the satrapy was still obliged to hold up their end of the agreement. Reparations to the estate were due. Defaulting on payments would constitute a breach of the parent protocols and draw the ire of Belbos. During these times of economic hardship, many humans decided to try out for a better life, not on the new colonies of the satrapy, but instead on the capital worlds of the hegemony, to live with Belbos visible in the sky. These economic migrants fled Earth by the million. After almost 5 years of research and investigation, the mystery of Nadam became a little less opaque. The research team discovered that this planet was a tomb. Thousands of years ago, the entire surface was subjected to an assault by low-yield nuclear warheads, seemingly designed to create as much radioactive fallout as possible, with the intended purpose of sterilizing this planet of life. Whilst this process was successful, organic compounds were found deep in caves underneath the surface. In one shocking discovery, scientists came across the remnants of organisms with surprisingly similar markers to DNA from life on Earth. This discovery led to more questions than it answered, and its legitimacy was questioned. Did humans once walk these worlds? Were these some distant cousins to humanity? Or perhaps, did a scientist simply forget to clean their shoes? The mystery deepened 1 year later in 2208, when scientists working in the nearby Philomere system discovered a second world blanketed by radioactive fallout. On Hasara, they ascertained that roughly 750,000 years ago, this planet was annihilated. The biosphere was completely destroyed in an eerily similar way to Nadam. However, on this world, human archaeologists would get a lucky break. An underground bunker was uncovered. Within this sealed complex, protected from the nuclear winter raging above, well-preserved bodies were found. Though clearly alien, these corpses shared an uncomfortably large number of traits with humanity. And as far as the archaeologists could tell, if it weren't for the 6th digit at the end of each limb, their skeletons looked human. What little DNA that could be extracted from the aliens showed that they shared a common evolutionary history with humanity. Perhaps they even evolved on the same world eons ago. Whilst the findings on both of these tomb worlds were revolutionary, they were not made publicly available. Instead, they were hidden deep within the archives of the Navy's Exploration Division on the orders of the satrap, and further travel to or investigation of Hasara and Nadam was banned. In 2213, the Navy encountered alien life which was, worryingly, completely unknown and undocumented by their overlords on Belbos. Under a cautious policy of first contact, humanity tried to extend a hand in friendship. Sadly, they were greeted with only violence and death from the aliens. When human ships started being lost on the edge of satrapy territory, they were written off as unfortunate accidents in the depths of space, until, finally, an escape pod was recovered with a lone human survivor. She painted a grim picture of the carnage wrought by this new alien threat, how they had encountered her vessel, a simple, unarmed construction ship on a peaceful mission to a distant star, how the humans had tried in vain to communicate with the strange tree-like alien vessels whose branches dwarfed their ship, but with no success. How the alien vessel attacked. It overwhelmed their shields, crippled their engines, and then its root-like protrusions extended out to entangle the human ship. The strange, plant-like aliens, who were almost miniature versions of their ship, then boarded the vessel, rounded up the crew, and began to experiment on the humans, not even bothering to take them back onto the alien ship. The humans were killed, one by one, in the most excruciating of ways, generally involving a final autopsy on a still living being, kicking and screaming on what had, until recently, been a dinner table. Finally, after their gruesome task was complete, the aliens departed. Had she not been deep inside the ship's bowels, repairing their nuclear drive, she would have been found and killed alongside the rest of the crew. Unable to pilot the entire vessel alone, she abandoned ship, being careful to bring the essential data from this first contact. On the opposite side of human space, the fleets of the satrapy were busy participating in a grand reenactment of the welcome ceremony of the Bronteroc people, on the 35th anniversary of the hegemony invasion of Great Nest. At the behest of the hegemony, the human ships even conducted live-fire drills, much to the distaste of the human admiralty. Inac-Sol relations fell to new lows. The Navy began establishing a spy network in the Inac satrapy, mindful of the reaction that their inflammatory and unnecessary display above Great Nest may have aroused. With the majority of the Sol Satrapy's fleets occupied in the Inax system, it would take almost a year for the human navy to respond properly to the hostile intent of the unknown aliens at humanity's borders. A hastily assembled gathering of Darker-class destroyers and Florida-class corvettes was dubbed the Periclean Expedition. Commanded by Admiral Jalaya Bakir, they finally tracked down the elusive alien threat in the Ferre system. For the first time, the Navy was able to test their weaponry, tactics and defences against a hostile force of equivalent technological prowess. The news of great victories was broadcast on Earth as they destroyed a few small and lightly armed observation outposts and alien mining operations. The public rejoiced. Admiral Bakir and her officers tempered their enthusiasm, acutely aware that the Navy had not managed to find or engage any of the alien ships that had raided human space. Destroying a few small outposts was not the same as defeating an entire fleet of warships. After almost a year of fighting, in 2218, communications were finally established with the enemy. Terrifyingly for the satrapy, the aliens were completely unknown to the Belbos, who were themselves indifferent to the threat, as they were not a child of ours. The Rahetan entity was not a single species, an entire planet alive and somehow working in concert. From the smallest single-cellular organisms and up to the gigantic tree-like structures that sprouted from the surface, they were all a part of the same collective intent. The closest analogy that human scientists could draw upon was a colony of ants, each ant individually devoid of consciousness, but together able to function and behave as a much more complex entity. Concepts like borders, war, and reparations were strange to the Rahetan entity, but human diplomats, backed up by the threat of Navy weaponry, managed to explain the idea of a closed border. Incursions into human space ceased, but humanity remained vigilant in the face of this truly alien threat. In 2220, human explorers discovered an alien species named the Matok in the Othana system. They used crude alloy-based weapons and tools, had basic governmental structures, and a low population. To draw an analogue to humanity's technological development, the Matok appeared to be in the late Iron Age. Within days of this discovery, the Belbos contacted Earth. The Sol Satrapy would be responsible for the care and protection of the Matok, until such a time as they were ready to join the hegemony. For they too were the children of Belbos and had a destiny written in the parent protocols. Given the abrupt nature of the Belbos communication, questions were raised about the informational security of the Navy. How had they known about the Matok before even the satrap of Earth? Human interstellar technology was, after all, based on hegemony design. Clearly, their surveillance project was much more extensive than humanity knew. 1 year later, Admiral Fred Phillips and Admiral Jalaya Bakir were called to Belbos. Along with a small cadre of other officers, they were brought before the Emperor. The supreme ruler of the hegemony decreed that the Sol military satrapy had failed in their holy mission. Humanity had not protected their siblings, the Matok. Humanity had not safeguarded the interests of the hegemony. Humanity had failed. The Emperor revealed images taken from the Othana system. As the Earth had been busy forming a task force to occupy the Othana system and fortify it, the unthinkable had happened. The images showed an alien armada entering the system, taking up position around the Matok's world and invading the planet. Horrific footage from the surface showed the devastation wrought by the invaders. After millions of Matok were dead, they were then pressed into slavery, forced to strip mine their world of precious ore and resources. These images, and the Emperor's audience with the admirals, was broadcast across the hegemony. The magnitude of Earth's failure was shocking. Emperor Shaddam proclaimed that failure would not be tolerated. The delegation present would serve as an example to the rest of humanity. They would be sentenced to death. Unwavering in their loyalty, Admiral Fred Phillips and the others saluted. Their cry of "Praise Belbos" echoed around the chamber as they were vaporized. The transmission from Belbos ceased. On Earth and her colonies, the people were shocked. The court of the satrap used this situation to end the human freedom of movement to the core worlds of the hegemony, stemming the flood of wealthy human migrants that had been leaving Earth since 2206. For the Navy, the execution of Fred Phillips was a turning point. Serious questions were asked at the highest levels. Faith and loyalty in Belbos were shaken. In an attempt to prevent such a situation repeating itself without any warning, the Admiralty began to establish a covert intelligence gathering operation on the Imperial capital. After years of migration, many humans were now in an excellent position to join such an operation, and with the sudden execution of the human admirals, many did. It was through this network of informants on the Imperial capital that the name Pythria first gained human attention. In 2224, the Imperial Razak's estate presented the Navy with a choice. Either the Admiralty could begin paying a subscription fee and receive access to the information from the estate's clandestine operatives on Inac, or the clumsy human attempts at espionage would be revealed. After extortionate payment was received, the estate revealed that the Inac satrapy had key information about the previous inhabitants of the radioactive tomb worlds Hasara and Nadam. For an additional fee, they would also begin to investigate further. 2 years later, the Periclean expedition arrived in the Uthana system. The satrap hoped by fighting there and expelling the alien occupation forces, they might win back the favour of Belbos. After heavy protestations from the Admiralty, the expedition engaged the aliens. A short campaign against a much smaller force yielded victory for the Navy. Marines were dropped onto the surface of the Matok world, overrunning the local defences and securing the planet. The satrap reported their success to the Emperor, hoping to gain favour. Sadly, his hopes were short-lived. An undersecretary for the Belbos diplomatic mission on Earth informed the satrap that as the Matok had been enslaved, colonised and generally contaminated, the experiment was now deemed a failure. And that meant that the Matok were now worthless and should be discarded at the earliest opportunity. They were now an irrelevance to the hegemony and the Emperor. The Navy should leave the animals to their new alien masters. With that, the Periclean expedition was ordered to withdraw from Uthana. A warship had been lost, and thousands of humans had died, so that Jeffrey Hammond could play at court politics in the hegemony. Resentment was reportedly coming to a boiling point amongst the fleet's cadre of officers. Back on Earth, there was an eruption of social disturbances. Mass protests filled the cities. They spread like a fungus across the capital and the colonies. Armed with the phrase, "Fred died, Belbos lied." Monuments were defaced and the economic heart of the satrapy ground to a halt. Even though the majority of these protests were entirely non-violent, the government's response was swift and brutal. Following the strict doctrine of Belbos, once initial law enforcement attempts by the Peace Corps proved ineffective at dispersing the dissidents, the military was deployed to stamp out the insurrection. Thousands were killed, and millions that joined the protests were rounded up and sentenced to a lifetime of hard labour. Uttering or transcribing the phrase, "Fred died, Belbos lied," became an offence. Those that were guilty would have their little finger removed. This archaic punishment allowed the offenders to complete their assigned manual labour, despite being deformed. Though the satrapy restored order, many lost all love for Belbos. In order to display their displeasure and identify others that were like-minded, a secret hand gesture emerged. The three-finger salute showed support and solidarity for the anti-Belbos movement, without risking the loss of your own finger. Alongside this salute, a new fashion emerged. A three-fingered glove showed your allegiance to the movement. However, this did not last long, as across the satrapy, the style of a three-fingered glove became common, perverted from its original intention. With social instability affecting human worlds, the court of the satrap elected to escalate a tense border situation with the Rahatan entity into open war. After a small border dispute near the Ferre system in 2231, the entire might of the Navy was unleashed. After the previous incursion over 10 years before, the entity had fortified its observation installations against further attack. But these defences were quickly swept aside as human ships began a long campaign into the very heart of Rahatan space. On Earth, propaganda declared this war was a very fight for the survival of the hegemony and the people of Earth. Privately, Belbos cared little for the actions of the Rahatan. In 2232, the Sol satrapy was also forced to officially open its borders to the Inak satrapy, who had been excluded after a minor terrorist incident by an apparent Bronteroc science vessel in the Sol system a decade before. The heavy hand of the hegemony was felt by the entire court of the satrap. Only a few months later, the estate presented irrefutable evidence to the Navy, collected by their covert operatives, that the Bronteroc had established a human prison world on the bleak and radioactive surface of a world deep within their space. Humans trapped on the human cage were being used for all manner of scientific experiments. In a knee-jerk response, all Bronteroc living in human space were stripped of their rights and resettled en masse to Hasara, which became known colloquially as the Bronteroc prison world. There can be little doubt that without the overbearing hand of the hegemony, open conflict between these two nations would have engulfed this area of the galaxy. Perhaps this was very lucky for humanity, as their fleets were busy prosecuting a war far away against the Rahatan entity. Human forces had occupied two worlds and were poised to invade their home planet, Rahatan. The aliens employed little in the way of tactics against the invasion forces, repeatedly using mass assaults in an attempt to stop the occupation of their worlds. Humans quickly realised that if they eliminated the largest of the Rahatan biological organisms, the great tree-like structures, the other Rahatan creatures in the local area would become aimless and passive. This knowledge was used to devastating effect on their homeworld, as the Navy preceded the landing of ground forces with a surgical orbital bombardment to remove the great trees. This reduced all other resistance by the entity to a non-issue. But the fall of their homeworld did not force an end to the war, as the court of the satrap had hoped. If anything, the entity was clearly enraged and clearly learning. In the Mugi system, it had laid a trap. The entity, which had displayed little in the way of tactics or strategy previously, lured the Royal Maiden fleet into the system and then ambushed them at the edge of a hyperlane emergence point. High above a gas giant, the two armadas clashed. Rahatan tree ships, giant organic behemoths, fired beam and particle weapons at the surprised human warships. The humans responded in kind with nuclear and kinetic assaults. A ferocious battle ensued. Had the Periclean expedition, led by Admiral Guy Gagny, not joined the fray, the Navy might have suffered their first defeat in Mugi. Meanwhile, the human operatives working on the Imperial capital in 2234 uncovered a vast collection of information on Pythria. Once the 6th satrapy of the hegemony, now nothing remains of their people. Great miners and craftsmen, they were brought into the fold to supply Belbos with raw materials. At some point in the last 100 years, Pythria fell out of favour. Tensions escalated between them and the hegemony. According to the records uncovered, they went against their parents' wishes again and again, until the Emperor decreed that the experiment with Pythria had failed, and they should be purged from existence. The exact crimes or methods used for the purging was not detailed, though a stellar location for Pythria was found. This information was then hidden by the Navy, under the strict orders of the Court of the Satrap. With the war against the Rahetan entity turning into a stalemate, positive news from the front all but dried up. In 2236, in an attempt to keep the populace from returning to the disorder of the past, the satrap began a campaign of broadcasting blanket coverage on the Inac satrapy. Detailed exposés on the tactical capabilities of Inac warships and the ease with which the Navy would defeat them were pushed on every media channel. Whilst this campaign did have the desired effect, it further stoked the public into an even greater anti-Bronteroc sentiment. In 2240, Tar-Kadal, the tectonically unstable and overexploited home of an alien race on the western border of the hegemony, exploded. Its eventual destruction had long been predicted by observers outside the insular Lycian utopia. Help and assistance was repeatedly offered by the hegemony, but declined. There were no problems inside the Lycian utopia. The Lycians made no apparent efforts to evacuate their planet, meaning that, aside from a few scattered survivors in space, their entire civilization perished along with their homeworld. After 5 grueling years of war inside Rahetan entity territory, and little gains on either side, the Navy managed to secure a new peace agreement. The entity would respect the new borders of the Sol satrapy, containing 2 entity worlds and their original homeworld. Interestingly to the Navy negotiators, the entity held no particular sentiment for the world of its birth. Instead, it displayed pragmatism, choosing not to waste further resources fighting an unwinnable war in perpetuity. This peace was heralded as a great victory on every human world, a successful test of strength and of willpower. New human colonists were even brought to the 3 worlds now devoid of entity organisms. Following this peace, the Rahetan entity revealed the existence of many alien civilizations beyond the borders of Belbos, on the other side of entity space. The Black Dominion, the Nuta Archivists, and the Merakian Republic, and many, many more. A galaxy teeming with life. Against the Council of the Hegemony, the Sol satrapy entered diplomatic relations with many of these aliens, even going so far as to allow free movement of sentience between the Nuta Archivists and the satrapy. Belbos was displeased. But less than a year after their great victory over the Rahetan, the Emperor of the Hegemony, Shaddam VI, was dead. The circumstances surrounding his death on the capital were shrouded in the usual amount of Belbos mystery. But following his death were 2 significant events. The Tronzaru Continuum made contact with Earth. This ancient race of enigmatic machines informed humanity that they would be watching their progress, and at the insistence of the Belbos, would be administering a species-wide inoculation to remove widespread biological vulnerabilities in humanity. The second is that the unpopular Roderick ascended to the throne with the help of the military, much to the chagrin of the High Court of the Hegemony. The Hegemony then stopped responding to all communication from Earth. Their embassies were abandoned, the protective garrison was recalled, and news stopped flowing from the Imperial capital. Covert operatives still reporting on the capital told tales of civil disturbances and fighting across the Imperial Palace. What started on just the capital quickly spread to all the worlds of the Hegemony. Belbos fractured, as 8 separate claimants denied the legitimacy of Empress Roderick I's claim to the throne. Just before the Imperial Palace was destroyed by orbital bombardment, amongst the chaos, a covert Navy operative gained access to a secret hegemony archive, the contents of which they tried to broadcast back to the Navy. Their transmission was garbled by the conflict, but emphasis was placed on a single word: Lupta. Without direct guidance from the hegemony, the satrap floundered. His court, like the hegemony, split in a myriad of different directions. Some suggested that the Navy should be deployed to aid the new Empress, or one of the other claimants that might win the day, in hope of gaining favour with the victor. Others counselled that the satrap should launch his own challenge to become the Emperor. Amidst this turmoil, the Navy decided to take action. Sick of the dictatorship of the satrap and returning fresh from victory in the field, they would not sit idly by, but instead seize this opportunity. They stormed into the palace of the satrap, arresting him and all of the members of his court in attendance. With the previous administration imprisoned, Admiral Guy Gagny took on the role of interim president. In his first address to all citizens of the Sol Satrapy, Admiral Gagny announced the birth of a new nation. The Free Human Republic would hold its first free and fair election under the careful watch of Navy representatives. Many parties formed to compete in the election. The three largest of these, that between them held almost all of the seats in the new parliament, were the National Defence Party, keen supporters of the Navy, the Human Xeno Alliance, staunch believers that humanity would only prosper by working with others, and the Human Advancement Front. The HFA fell just short of achieving an outright majority, but with assurances from the two other major parties, formed a minority government. Admiral Gagny, the interim president, peacefully passed his powers to the leader of the HFA, President-elect Charlotte Foster. But what of the other satrapies and the Civil War now burning across the stars? Would this fledgling republic survive the turmoil of its birth, or would the hegemony regain their supremacy over the people of Earth? This concludes our analysis of the Age of Subjugation for humanity in this timeline. Please refer to the next chapter of this report for further details on the Belbos Timeline. The Ministry of Timelines bears no official responsibility for the content of this research. The extensive use of mercenary companies in this timeline must not be ignored, as it has clearly decided the balance of power on many occasions. Further research into the applications of mercenary contracting is advised. Civil war gripped the hegemony of Belbos. A dozen candidates vied for the imperial throne. Across a dozen imperial worlds, brothers fought brothers, each secure in their righteousness, knowing that their candidate was the true candidate. Trade dried up. Transport ceased. A civilization that had stood unaging for millennia collapsed. Humanity, who had been bound by imperial shackles for almost 200 years, was once more adrift and alone. The newly christened Free Human Republic rose from these embers. With war surrounding this fledgling nation, the Free Human Republic was thrust straight into an economic crisis. You see, the hegemony had been a single, interconnected economy, each world reliant on every other. So with the complete collapse of the hegemony and the cessation of interstellar commerce, humanity's economy ground to a halt. Production chains were broken. Crucial raw materials did not arrive. Buyers for human exports evaporated overnight. Without even firing a single shot inside human territory, the Belbos Civil War pushed humanity to the brink. Their close neighbours, the Razak's imperial estate, fared much better. They had spent a long time preparing for the collapse of Belbos. For the plebels, the study of market forces and dynamics was the most important branch of scientific research. Generations had been spent refining and improving their predictive models, until one day, the greatest mind that Razak's society had ever produced, Leo Regal, predicted the fall of Belbos. His mathematics precisely tracked the movement of the masses, and he could hear the stuttering heartbeat of Belbos 1,000 years before it failed. With the arrival of the Civil War in 2243, the Razak's imperial estate rebranded, and health, happiness, and hedonism was born. As if war and economic disaster in the same year were not enough for the Free Human Republic, it was at this time that they made first contact with the Harappan Empire, thanks to the meddling of foreign neuter diplomats. This first contact shook humanity more than any before, for the Harappan Empire was not a state of alien entities, but a nation of humans. The lost Indus Valley civilization was no longer lost. Instead, they had reappeared on a harsh, frozen world half a galaxy away. Interest and obsession with the history of the Indus Valley and history in general reached new heights in the Free Human Republic. Due to the great distances involved, a physical first contact between the Harappan Empire and the Free Human Republic was not possible. And with the near-human six-fingered corpses on Hasara in the forefront of their minds, the Earth's diplomats were very keen to establish the lineage of the Harappans. This, however, proved difficult. First, the Harappan diplomats wore traditional dress. This included thick, warm clothing and, importantly, thick mittens. The number of digits on their hands was thus totally obscured. Secondly, translational issues plagued the humans. The Harappan language shared a great deal of ancestry with modern human languages, but its unique differences kept leading to stumbles during these first meetings. In the Harappan language, you see there is no word for finger or thumb, but instead only the word for digit. This meant that when the Earth diplomats asked, in a fit of pique, "Just tell us how many fingers you have," and the Harappans answered 5, a confusing situation unfolded. Questions regarding the translation were required. But is a finger a thumb, or is a thumb a finger? Around and around the diplomats went, spiralling into nonsense. One Harappan, shocking their counterparts, finally removed their mitten to show a perfectly normal human hand, and put an end to the linguistic debates. But how had the Harappan people ended up on their cold, dark home? They themselves had no answers to give, only the whispers of myths and legends. In 2246, the benevolent interstellar flock made diplomatic contact with the Free Human Republic. The Inak research satrapy, like their siblings on Earth and Razax, had thrown off the yoke of imperial oppression, and a new nation had been born. With this re-establishment of communications, rumours of the so-called ultra-human humans reached Earth. Living on the human cage in Bronterock space, it was reported that these humans had been surgically altered to host a variety of cybernetic implants. The Republic's Senate was sickened. In an attempt to improve relations and curtail the threat of military conflict, a Bronterock embassy was established on Earth, and an independent commission of observers was sent to observe the human prison world. Had the Bronterock really mutilated the humans living in their nation? In 2247, President Charlotte Foster declared a national day of celebration, Prosperity Day. Critics argued that Prosperity Day was a mockery of the current economic situation, as the Free Human Republic edged closer and closer to total economic collapse. We have a recording of one media broadcast covering this event.
Despite what many are claiming to be the economic collapse of the Republic and scattered reports of starvation on the outer colonies, the President today formally announced a new national holiday, Prosperity Day, stating that Everything is just so great now, oh yeah, the sunlit uplands of freedom.
On the other side of the galaxy, across the Gulf of Space, the constructors of Mechain became the latest civilization to fall under the sway of the Nuta archivists. Whilst on the surface, the subjugation of a third civilization should be a shocking event, many argued that the constructors were not sapient, and in fact, they were not really even sentient. This grouping of rogue machines was simply a tool being placed firmly back inside the toolbox. Critics argued that the Nuta authority was growing too rapidly, unchecked, across that region of the galaxy. From a human perspective, the Nuta had an unhealthy obsession with the past. Even though humanity was, at this time, wrapped up in their own little quest for knowledge thanks to the Harappans. Deep under the surface, humans were envious that the Nuta could have such a detailed record of their history. They were, quite understandably, very distrustful of any long-lived empires that ruled over other nations or peoples. In 2250, the Republic signed an incredible deal with the HHH. They gave away a handful of cargo freighters filled with alloys in exchange for a full bailout of the Terran economy. There were rumours of the health, happiness and hedonism negotiator responsible for this agreement retiring to a life of lavish luxury within the Republic immediately thereafter. Yet the Republic media reported these rumours as being entirely unfounded. Even though the public rejoiced, Earth's leadership was acutely aware that the HH8 bailout was only a temporary reprieve. Leading human economists reported that the Republic was in a death spiral. Without hegemony trade, it would be unable to support a society at this advanced technological level. Elements of the Admiralty, thinking outside the box, proposed the addition of new worlds and resources, specifically from the antagonistic Telforth Empire. Their proposals of conquest were the only concrete solutions provided to a private Senate committee tasked with saving the Republic's economy. Technological fairy tales, such as the creation of self-sufficient orbital habitats, were also presented, but the Navy experts branded them as entirely unfeasible in the current timeframe. The one solution that would not lead to a weaker Republic in this time of uncertainty was the Navy's. Publicly, Admiral Guy Gagney led the calls for war, claiming that the Matok should be freed in the name of Fred Phillips. After the official declaration of war, he took command of the Periclean expedition. Battle was joined by the Telforth around Torfree's Star. As had happened decades before, the Navy routed the Telforth. This time, it was a Christmas victory. 2 more years of fighting, and human victories gave way to peace. The great Telforth Empire surrendered their right to Othana and the surrounding systems. The Free Human Republic acquired the new planet's resources and people that the Economist required. The Matok were freed from slavery and given full citizenship rights within the Free Human Republic in the name of the martyr Fred Phillips. The territory of the Free Human Republic now extended all the way out to the Galactic Rim. 2254 was a year of tragedy for the FHR. The first elected president died in office. Though her death was entirely unsuspicious in nature, she died of old age. Rumours abound that she was, in fact, assassinated. With the loss of the president, a motion of no confidence in the ruling Human Advancement Front was pushed through the Senate, forcing an election. Admiral Guy Gagney, hero of the people and father of the Republic, won the election in an unforeseen landslide vote. He was also the leader of the Church of Belbos. This political party and religious organisation believed that humanity's future must be to follow in the example of Belbos, to become overlords, parents, to use the parent protocols, regarded by the Church as holy texts, and then rule the galaxy. The firm hand of parental guidance must be applied. And with this policy in place, the Free Human Republic took in the Savasic satrapy as a client state. There was outrage in the Senate. Had humanity learned nothing from their history, that we would so blindly become Belbos? By 2256, Guy had become an incredibly divisive president. On Savasic II, Guy Gagny ordered the establishment of a human garrison. The Senate and public at large were shocked to see human forces occupying former Belbos garrisons on former Belbos satrapies. Even inside the Church of Belbos, moderate elements did not want the Republic to become Belbos. After 2 years of turmoil in the Senate, which led to economic, political, and societal stagnation, and with many convinced the new Republic was on the cusp of collapse, the Senate chose to give emergency powers to the Admiralty in order to break the deadlock in the government, which had all but ground to a halt. This period further cemented the power of the Admiralty and their position as the bulwark of democracy. For the average citizen, life improved. One of the first acts by the Admiralty with their new power was to sign a free trade agreement with health, happiness, and hedonism, and enter their customs union. Business boomed for both nations. In 2260, 2 senators were then arrested under charges of treason by the Admiralty. The Delegated Powers Act, granting the Admiralty the right to suspend trial, expired before the sentencing date, meaning that a full Senate hearing was required. Before the Senate could meet to conduct this trial, Guy Gagny intervened. A presidential veto was used to protect the 2 senators, Max Still and Ed Braith, around whom conspiracy swirls for the rest of their political careers. In order to limit the powers of the presidency, strict controls on his power were implemented by the Senate. This change was made at many levels of the political system. Levels of bureaucracy were thrown up to impede the more extreme aims of the Church of Belbos. Forms, it was argued, are the final proof that the pen is mightier than the sword, as forms, not weapons, were now the safeguard of democracy. The bureaucracy expanded to meet the needs of the ever-expanding bureaucracy. President Gagny was barred from making any major policy changes to the Republic. With these sweeping reforms, his office became more of a figurehead than the original balanced power that Guy had intended and first held in 2243, when the Republic was formed. In the 2264 election, Guy Gagny was re-elected with a hairline majority. Calls of electoral tampering were rampant across the Republic. Prior to the election, his adversaries had assumed he stood no chance at winning. They then ignored him and allowed him to claim victory, as their votes were then split. The Senate responded to Guy's victory by establishing multiple commissions to investigate and safeguard future elections. Along with these commissions, they instigated strict new policies on voter identification. This further inhibited the effective functioning of human democracy. 2 years later, the Free Human Republic was again at war with the Great Telforth Empire. Amongst the public of the Republic, it was called Guy's War. The President, the Church of Belbos, and their health, happiness, and hedonism backers had declared a preemptive war on the Telforth Empire. Over a decade of peace was thrown away in an attempt to bring the Telforth into line, following the strictures of the parent protocols. For 3 years, the Navy dawdled around the external systems of the Telforth Empire, with no real military engagements. Sick of the indecisiveness, the President pushed for the Navy to invade the core Telforth system, Valen. Only a few weeks after the Valen campaign began, the invasion ended in a crushing defeat for humanity. In the largest military disaster in human history, 2 fleets were repulsed by Telforth forces. The Admiralty intelligence and insistence of the President to begin the attack led to a vast underestimation of the enemy fleets. Fully 1/3 of the Navy's ships were wrecked in Valen, with the rest requiring extensive repairs before they could be put back into the fight. In the haste of their retreat, the Navy also failed to defend their army counterparts. Army transports were destroyed en masse by the Telforth forces. Reports from the battle are hard to piece together, but it does appear that the Navy sounded the retreat. However, there was a monumental miscommunication. The Army were then caught in the crossfire between the retreating Navy ships and the Telforth advance. Only 1 in 6 troop transports managed to escape the system, with a death toll for the brief campaign estimated at 1.4 million humans. Those lives lost in just 2 weeks. It was the largest military blunder in human history. In 2270, the investigation of the human prison world, renamed Earth 2.1, came to a conclusion. The Bronterok had implanted cybernetic constructs into the human beings living there. Initial outrage at the appalling alien experimentation on humans dissolved as it became clear that this was done in strict compliance with the Bronterok legal code. Fair punishment in their society was to be a laboratory subject, to advance science and give back to their society. On top of that, remaining humans on the once dubbed human prison world now worked in law enforcement, and a burgeoning merchant class had emerged, with a high level of social welfare. There were even calls for societal reform within the Human Republic, so that all humans could enjoy the living standards of those living under the Bronterok. Around this time, a fascination with alien cultures began to take deep root in human society. Brought in by cybernetic humans from Inac space, the ritual of bathing in a cocktail of mutagenic chemicals exploded as a fad on human worlds. For unaltered humans, the health effect of these mutagenics were very, very bad. Due to a bureaucratic mistake, the human government decreed that all public swimming areas, showers, and other bathing locations should become mutagenic spas. This increased HHH profits enormously, as they were the primary supplier of the imported chemicals from Inac. Form 32EB1-C was issued instead of Form 32EB1-B, a quick switch made by a well-placed plebel within the human administration. This was a case of active espionage that led to disaster for the lives of ordinary people. In 2272, intel reached the Navy that the Harappan Empire was not a single lonely planet lost in the depths of space. Their numbers were in fact in the trillions. The Free Human Republic confronted the Empire, who were rather cagey to corroborate any details of the Empire's space. Until this point, Earth's assumption had been that over time the Harappan Empire would be subsumed by the Republic as it expanded naturally. A diplomatic game of cat and mouse ensued. The Harappans were shocked when they discovered what had been done to Earth since their exile thousands of years ago. Foundries, strip mines, and the wheels of industry had poisoned the garden. We have an excerpt of the speech given by the Harappan Empire when disseminating news of this catastrophe to his people.
Brothers and sisters, I stand before you today with terrible news. You may have heard that our long search for the garden is over. We have found the lost jewel out there in the deep darkness. Our celestial surveyors have spent weeks authenticating the validity of this data before I bring it to you now. It cannot be disputed. These are just a few of the images we have recorded, and as you can see, it isn't what we thought. There's been no apocalyptic war, no terraforming event. It is our cousins, our wayward cousins, who were supposed to protect the garden, this Earth, and keep her safe. They have failed. The skin of this world has been split to harvest the precious ores below. Her skies have been corrupted by 1,000 industrial byproducts. The very water, the water is now poisoned. I vow to you, noble people of the Empire, we will not rest until the garden is restored, no matter the cost.
A trade dispute between the Igarian Consortium and Health, Happiness and Hedonism descended into an all-out war in 2275. HHH claimed that the Consortium, a splinter faction of the hegemony of Belbos, were a criminal syndicate. With a plebeian chairman and with human mercenaries leading their armed forces, the Consortium struck deep into HHH space. Health, Happiness and Hedonism fleets were entirely routed above Wenkworth, the closest planet to the old Imperial capital. This gave the Consortium access to the protected shipping routes of HHH. This was the start of a period of decades of intermittent warfare within their territory. The space lanes were burning. The human navy, meanwhile, was on the other side of human space, still fighting in Guy's War, and thanks to a border dispute, unable to reinforce the beleaguered plebeians. By placating the local Belbos warlords, human fleets then were able to converge on the besieged capital star system Hran Hep Homan. In 2279, the navies of the Free Human Republic and Health, Happiness and Hedonism launched a coordinated assault on the besiegers of Hran Hep Homan. They achieved an overwhelming victory in the Battle of HHH, smashing the Consortium mercenaries. 1 year later, in 2280, Carlos Velasco, leader of the National Defense Party and the victorious admiral of the Battle of HHH, ousted President Gagny. The militarists were now in control. However, this did little to help the political apparatus of the Republic. It then only intensified the deadlock in the now spiritualist-controlled parliament. Former President Guy Gagny died in 2282. His supporters claim he was assassinated. However, each faction had their own theory as to who the assassin was. Admiral Guy Gagny allegedly passed away due to old age, but true believers refused to believe the lies. Naval intelligence then used this opportunity to launch a disinformation campaign, suggesting that Belbos were responsible for this death. This further added to the chaos within the Church of Belbos in the wake of their leader's demise. Former President and Admiral Guy Gagny, the father of the Free Human Republic, was given a full state funeral on Earth. Millions attended. Billions viewed the proceedings from across the Republic. In 2284, to counter the anti-human operations of the Church of Belbos-led Parliament, President Velasco began to implement additional levels of bureaucracy in an attempt to obfuscate any real decision-making power the Parliament possessed. He was able to do this, supported by recent advantages in AI research from naval intelligence. This allowed the presidency to continue to navigate their increasingly complex system of checks and measures. Before human forces could occupy the Consortium's capital and put an end to this criminal syndicate once and for all, in 2286, an HHH backroom peace deal was agreed to let commerce flow freely once more and put an end to the devastation wrecking HHH territory. This prevented the Republic's navy from legally continuing with their invasion plans. Unfortunately, the Consortium had no such qualms. Consortium raids and conflict continued in the HHH. Hardly peace in our time. In 2270, President Velasco's campaign to sideline Parliament reached its apotheosis. Form KDGHKX-023463Q, which could only be ratified by a majority of the Parliament, required that Parliament must have prior approval from Parliament to sit in session. But as the requirement for this form was implemented in an interim period, the Parliament was unable to sit. They were caught in an effective catch-22. This then sidelined the Church of Belbos faction, who had dominated parliamentary politics for the last decade. The election of 2290 was also then postponed by President Velasco on a technicality, as the election mandate required approval from a sitting parliament. With these changes, a new electoral cycle was codified, but that would not start for another 10 years until the end of the century. During this period, the unfortunate use of mutagenic chemicals was entirely phased out from human space, but in its place a culture of hedonistic sloth had grown like a fungus. Personal hygiene remained taboo, for if you didn't shower, you smelled bad, but if you showered in the chemicals, well, your epidermis would tend to fall off. By 2291, having centralized power, President Velasco launched a preemptive strike against the still fractured hegemony of Belbos, out of fear that, should the hegemony manage to reunify, they would then represent the single greatest threat to human sovereignty in the local region. Like the conflict against the Consortium, HHH's border defences were swept aside in the opening stages of the war, once more plunging their economy into turmoil. 2 years into this war, at the Second Battle of Harappan, humanity suffered a stunning defeat. All naval forces were routed by the Imperial Armada. At this point, the mood in the Human War Office was despondent. Many began brushing up on their knowledge of the parent protocols in anticipation of a hegemony victory. But only a year later, in 2294, the Navy, assisted by health, happiness and hedonism negotiators, managed to acquire the contracts of a mercenary group that had until now been pledged to the Belbos. Their term of service lapsed for a period of only a few days, but that was enough of an opening for the ruthless HHH. With this fleet now stationed above Harappan, this effectively returned control of the system to the Free Human Republic and her allies. In a bloodless coup d'etat, FHR reclaimed HHH space over the next 3 years in a series of brutal engagements. Planets were set ablaze. Civilian lives were extinguished with little remorse, thrown heedlessly into the meat grinder. Many in the Navy did not believe that their so-called victories would have been possible without the support of the Belbos mercenaries, whose bloodlust and wanton disregard for life had caused insane levels of collateral damage all across health, happiness and hedonism's space. Eventually, by 2296, the fighting moved over from the HHH territory and for the first time crossed into Belbos space. By the end of the year, having breached the Belbos defences, the Navy had begun an assault on the ancient Imperial capital. For 2 years, the largest ground battle in human history was fought for the capital of the hegemony. The bulk of the fighting was done by plebeian mercenaries, not by human soldiers. As the invasion ground on and began to turn into a stalemate, the Admiralty decreed that orbital weapons should be employed to break the will of the Belbos defenders. This did not achieve the desired goal. Instead, it further strengthened Imperial resolve. In 2298, Navy intelligence received a strange communique from the Bronterock. These files detailed the Harappan relocation project, for Harappan civilization on Old Earth had been deemed a failure by the Belbos, too peaceful, and instead of pronouncing the entire project a failure, they decided to relocate the Harappan to a distant world with a harsh climate. The hope was that both they and the humans on Earth would become the warrior caste the Belbos required. The Bronterock files also included shocking details of HHH involvement in this ancient conspiracy. They were responsible for supplying the parts used in the transport vessels, which, coincidentally, were known to be faulty. Which, coincidentally, the Razaks knew to be generally faulty. It wasn't until 2299 that the last Belbos outpost on the old capital surrendered. Belbos had fallen. With the fall of the old Imperial capital, more information about the Harappan relocation program began to come to light, and the reason for the abandonment. Unfortunately for the Harappans, they were left in the cold dark of their new home due to a mistake in the Belbos bureaucracy. Paperwork was misfiled and then lost. This left that group of humans entirely adrift in space. With the occupation of Belbos, the previous loyalists from the fractured Church of Belbos then reformed as the Church of the Martyr. In Fred's name, we trust. In 2300, on the turn of the century, the Earth received an official visit from the Harappan Emperor. The Emperor demanded that the Earth be turned over to the Empire, that all industrial work on the planet should cease immediately. The Free Human Republic refused. This was the start of a catastrophic breakdown in human-human relations. The Harappan Emperor was asked to leave, and reminded to fill in his paperwork correctly if he ever wanted to come back to Earth. He did vow to return, to fix the garden, paperwork or not. This concludes our analysis of the human fight for freedom from Belbos in this timeline. Please refer to the next chapter of this report for further details on the Belbos timeline. The Ministry of Timelines bears no official responsibility for the content of this research. The sequence of events present in this document clearly shows that information is power, and a vast but undetected intelligence network is key for any civilization attempting to survive at a galactic level. Constant blunders by Navy intelligence are a key reason for the downfall of the Republic, and more investigation into this topic is warranted. The Republic census of 2300 showed, for the first time, that humans were now a minority species within the Free Human Republic. Matok now made up 37% of the population, with a smattering of other races pushing humanity under the 50% threshold. This led to a mixed response from humanity, the more xenophobic elements of the populace taking it as a personal attack. However, the Human Xeno Alliance political party celebrated as their membership now swelled. By this time, the once reviled Prosperity Day celebration had taken on a new meaning within the Free Human Republic, becoming a brief annual period of fasting, sobriety and chastity to honour those who, like the great and noble martyr Fred Phillips, had given so much to ensure the lives of hedonistic excess and luxury now enjoyed by the people of Earth. Later that same year, Quapulki, a fringe band of raiders on the edge of hegemony space, reformed into a horde under the Great Khan Gan Batan. They did this in the midst of an attack by the Riser 47 Sentinel network, a machine intelligence hell-bent on expunging the galaxy of all biological life. Whether the Quapulki horde would have unified without this direct threat remains to be seen. In a push for more power, the disreputable Senator Max Still made a play at becoming a governor of the Earth sector, the most important political sector in the Republic. This senator, who had narrowly escaped a charge of treason due to the intervention of a previous president, was entirely unprepared as his plans backfired. This caused the government to reopen the investigation into Max Still on the charge of treason. Some within the Senate made it their mission to expose his purported sins. The following year, allegations were levelled against the notorious Senator Max Still that he was in fact a spy working for the Harappan Empire, a lost colony of humans on the other side of the galaxy. Rumours made clear the character of this senator. His history of puppy kicking came to light, and this led to a widespread national discussion of the controversial proposal that Senator Still made to legalise puppy beatings. To this day, Max Still has denied these rumours or any involvement with that bill. By 2303, the war for Belbos was reaching a conclusion. With the ancient hegemony capital occupied and only a smattering of resistance at the fringes of hegemony space, the Republic's victory was widely thought to be a foregone conclusion. This opinion was further solidified when the Republic won the Second Battle of Torfi's Star against the last remaining hegemony forces led by the Great Telforth Empire. It was around this time that the Republic began to adopt mercantile traditions. Health, happiness and hedonism beliefs and traditions were seeping into human culture. A specialist class trained in the arcane art form of dealing with the plebeians was beginning to emerge. This merchant class protected the rest of humanity from the underhanded nature of the HHH, at a tidy profit, of course. Far across the galaxy, the Great Khan met his first defeat in the Unabin system. Media reports of this distant threat had generally been ignored by the populace of the Republic, and with his defeat at the hands of an apparently minor power, the Harappan Empire, the Horde was written off almost entirely as any sort of threat. On Earth, people viewed it as a minor skirmish on the edge of the galaxy between backwater peoples. In fact, it was a battle of titanic proportions, dwarfing the engagements of even the Belbos Civil War. Had humanity paid closer attention to this conflict, they may have been prepared better for the coming storm of the Harappans. It is only with the privilege of hindsight that we can see how mistaken the Republic's assessment was. Instead of displaying the limited power of the Horde, who had single-handedly beaten back the Riser 47 Sentinel network, this news clearly showed the rising power of the Harappan Empire. The Earth remained blissfully ignorant. In 2304, reports surfaced that the Battle of Unabin had actually led to the death of Great Khan Gan-Batan. With his death, the Horde fractured, and in the absence of leadership, the Harappan Empire mopped up any remaining resistance, adding this area of the galaxy to their now growing territory. It was also in 2304 that the War for Belbos officially ended, with an overwhelming human victory. The Free Human Republic celebrated as the old Imperial capital was added to the Republic. In a turn of events that shocked the Senate, Max Still managed to weasel his way into the governorship of Belbos on a platform of increased alloy production, despite his past agrarian leanings and voting record. Many would also call for him to run as a presidential candidate in the upcoming election, but as of 2305, he had not announced his candidacy. The Bronterok leadership gained association status with the Free Trade Zone of Health, Happiness and Hedonism and the Free Human Republic in 2306. This was in exchange for setting up a lucrative research sharing project on Earth. Human leadership guaranteed that the Bronterok would achieve full market integration within 2 years. Humanity was beginning to learn from their plebeian cousins in the ways of contractual bamboozlement. Only a few months later, the Free Human Republic Senate voted to accept the vassalization proposal of the Agarian Consortium, a trading group that HHH claimed was in fact an entirely criminal enterprise. This would be labelled as one of the biggest blunders of human diplomacy in history, and played a pivotal role in the mistrust that formed between the Republic and her neighbours and allies in the years to come. Health, happiness and hedonism was outraged. Eventually, a deal was reached whereby they would pay the Earth in refined alloys, and in exchange, humanity would integrate the criminals into their Republic within 2 more years, robbing them of their independence and preventing them from continuing in their commercial enterprise indefinitely. Through deft political maneuvering, the Earth managed to profit at the expense of all parties involved. In 2308, the Republic was struck with tragedy, as 3 of the Republic's top scientists were found dead over the span of a 3-month period, perishing due to apparent natural causes. It was suspected by some that the notorious Governor Max Still ordered the assassination of the Free Human Republic's scientific elite. A fiery debate erupted within the Senate centering around this governor. Many conspiracy theories emerged from the turmoil. Some suggested a Matok plot to usurp the scientific field from humanity, or a sanctioned operation planned by Max Still to murder current leaders and political opposition. The Senate ordered an investigation into the validity of the latter conspiracy theory. In actuality, their deaths were part of a larger plot conducted by the Harappans as a punishment for the poisoning of Earth and a prelude to war. They murdered Earth's greatest minds. 2 years later, in 2310, the newest president of the Free Human Republic died after just 3 weeks in office. The Human-Xeno Alliance's electoral success was very short-lived. Sophie Dubois, leader of the XHA, briefly became president before dying at the relatively young age of 104. This marked the second president to die in office in the short 63-year history of this young nation. Within the Republic, senators debated the likelihood of Governor Max Still having been somehow responsible. After a short preliminary hearing conducted without the invitation of the governor, he was found guilty on some counts, but was not stripped immediately of his governorship. Now a household name across the Republic, Governor Still had powerful allies that continued to campaign for his innocence. In 2311, the benevolent interstellar flock, the Bronterok, were given full access to the human plebal free trade zone, which included the added protection of a joint task force designed to prevent piracy or any other impediments to trade across the customs union. After an extensive research project on the old Imperial capital, the scientists leading the investigation revealed that Belbos was a founding member of the First League, an ancient galactic federal nation comprised of a multitude of worlds and species. However, unlike the other members of the League, Belbos were the only species to survive into the present day. Alongside this shocking discovery, surviving Imperial records indicated that humanity was in fact the third attempt at uplifting a warlike humanoid species by the Belbos in that area of space. What further secrets of the past would be found on the now ruined capital? 2 years after being found guilty of treason, Governor Max Still was finally issued a punishment sentence. To the dismay of the Admiralty, who were amongst the primary opponents of the governor and his allegedly anti-human ways, Max Still's only punishment was a 2% pay reduction. The media labelled this a tragic miscarriage of justice. Calls for urgent reform in the Byzantine legal system of the Republic were made. The Due Process Initiative seconded this push for governmental reform. 3 of their leading senators recommended putting the system of forms into something of a more solid constitution. In 2313, HHH representatives within the Free Trade Zone began pushing for a communal transport system. Their idea was to implement a network of hyper-relays in order to facilitate trade and transportation across the Free Trade Zone. In response, the Earth's negotiators begged for economic assistance if humanity was to have any hope of joining the project. Trade was prospering. The Free Human Republic now stood at the centre of a vast network of interconnected economies, which in total rivaled the previous heights of the hegemony of Belbos. Their navy was larger than at any other point in human or hegemony history. The Supremacy-class battleships represented the greatest weapon the human race had ever produced, and was now being deployed across the Republic's space. All neighbouring threats had been disarmed or eliminated. Humanity felt safe and confident. It came as a great surprise to the people of Earth when, in 2315, the Harappan Empire declared war on the Free Human Republic. They cited the ruin of Earth as casus belli. The Free Human Republic had already lost Earth once to the Belbos. They would not surrender their homeworld again, even to other humans. Following the declaration of war, the Senate streamlined a new piece of legislation, the Mercenary Support War Form. The Senate, in response to Harappan aggression, further expanded the use of mercenary fleets in support of this and further war efforts to protect peace, prosperity, and bureaucracy. The war debts were piling up, but the forms of war required everyday humans to make sacrifices. From across the Gulf of Space, the Nuta offered their assistance. Shipments of refined alloys, crucial in the construction of warships, were offered in exchange for some small concessions and voting alignment within the galactic community, which many humans regarded as an impotent body reminiscent of the decrepit United Nations of old Earth. The Republic, of course, accepted, and ordered their diplomats to defer to Nuta policy within the community. This agreement was, at the time, regarded as a coup d'etat of foreign policy for humanity, but may in fact have been the most expensive trade deal the human race ever signed, dwarfing the cost of previous plebal subterfuges to human sovereignty and supremacy. 18 months after the official declaration of war, many in the Republic began to think that the Harappan War was nothing more than a political stunt. The distances between the Republic and the Harappans was vast. However, the Empire utilised a little-known tear in the fabric of space, a wormhole, to bring their fleets directly into Republic space. When the Harappan Armada first appeared in Torfi's star, the Admiralty were in disbelief. Many thought that the Navy was suffering from a systemic sensor issue, as the scale of the invasion force dwarfed all previous estimates of Harappan military power. The governor of New Abledon, the only habitable planet in orbit of Torfi's star, issued an emergency decree: martial law. The next inhabited system, Othana, quickly followed suit. Terms of national service were extended, and conscription across the Republic began. The governments of those outermost systems were well aware that the majority of the human navy were garrisoned around Earth in the core sector, and would not arrive before the Harappans began landing troops on their worlds. New Abledon was invaded first, and millions dead from orbital bombardment, plasma rifle, and old-fashioned bayonet, the planet surrendered. The first line of defense was breached. The Admiralty had hoped that the Empire would then spend time regrouping and consolidating their gains, thus giving the Navy more time to organize and respond. Unfortunately, the Harappans quickly gathered their forces from New Abledon, and after leaving a skeleton garrison behind, began moving to the Othana system. On their arrival in Othana, they met an entirely outmatched and unprepared Bronterok fleet. Due to a communications blunder by Earth's alliance, the Bronterok had been en route to rendezvous with Earth's navy, but instead their main warfleet was lost in a stunning logistical snafu as they faced the entire Harappan Armada alone. After passing an emergency poll tax, the FHR bought the contracts on a massive mercenary fleet from a Nuta vassal in the Uralian system. They were immediately sent on a course directly for Harappan space. The idea was to put pressure on the Empire and relieve the beleaguered defenders of the Republic. Only a year after the fall of New Abledon, Othana III was invaded by the Harappans. After a few months of fighting and more millions dead, the Empire forces issued a full retreat on the planet and withdrew into orbit. It may have only been a small reprieve, but it was still the first FHR victory in the war. A victory that was celebrated on Earth. The media began reporting this as a possible turning point in the war against the Harappan Empire. In truth, the retreat was not a military defeat for the Harappans, but instead an act of mercy for the people of Othana III. During the defense of Othana III, the human general Wagner, who was helping with the evacuation of the Matok civilians, was killed while shielding a young child, protecting that Matok. The Harappans, shocked by such a high-ranking human officer sacrificing himself for an alien child, temporarily retreated to allow time for civilians to evacuate the planet before they continued with their assault. within the free trade zone, relations were now being strained. With the loss of their fleet, the Bronteroc now felt strong-armed in continuing to join this war effort, as the Earth held little meaning for them. Whilst Othana III still remained under nominal control of the Republic, they were entirely besieged by the Empire. Leaving a small garrison in orbit to continue the blockade, the remainder of the Harappan invasion force pressed further into Republic territory, now on a direct path for Earth. In 2319, in response to this clear threat to the heart of the Republic, the Admiralty declared a no-retreat order. Earth must be saved. And to do that, the lives of every man and woman in the Navy were now forfeit, if they would mean the protection of the Earth. Any serviceman found to have retreated in the face of the enemy would receive a summary judgment. With this order given, the combined navies of Earth, Hran-Hep-Homan, and Inak formed up in the Sirius system, only a few star systems away from the Earth. In a great speech to his forces, Grand Admiral Roberto Sanchez decreed that the line must be drawn here, that no Harappan could be allowed to move one more light second in the direction of Earth. Humanity would never surrender their home again. By April 2020, 6 months later, the Grand Admiral was dead and the Navy had been entirely destroyed. The Harappans had annihilated the Allied fleets in Sirius. The star system had fallen. Terror gripped the Earth as the Navy was swept aside and the path to the capital left open. Only the FTL dampening beacon on the planet of Mandragora now prevented the Harappans from attacking Earth immediately. In the Sirius system, on Mandragora, a fierce battle ensued as the Harappans attacked. General Ji Yang and the Titanic beasts under Republic control tried to hold out in the face of a heavy positronic bombardment. This was truly the last line of defense for the planet Earth. On the other side of the galaxy, the mercenary fleets employed by the Republic took advantage of the lax orders they had been issued. The mercenary group hired to attack the Harappan Empire instead assaulted the Raider Collective Free Space nearby, en route to Harappan space. They killed the families and navies of a rival mercenary group, killing millions of civilians whilst citing the legal loophole of an unexpected combat situation which was contained within their contract. They used the excuse of following orders to commit atrocities whilst under the pay of the FHR. Humanity had in fact funded a gang dispute. In 2322, General Ji Yang managed to escape the battle on Sirius to deliver important military information to the Admiralty. Instead of leading the defense of the Sirius system, she then ran and was proclaimed President of the Republic. She was installed in a rushed ceremony, for in the turmoil of the Harappan assault, most legitimate opposition candidates had been unable to stand against her as they could not reach Earth in time for the election. Fearful of the imminent invasion of Earth, the now President Ji Yang relocated her administration to Belbos. Just as Mandragora fell and the Harappans closed in, she fled Earth. Before leaving, the President gave her final order on the planet. She proclaimed the Emergency Defense Act. Every man, woman, and child were given a gun to defend Earth and drafted into the army. Not a single person left on the planet was technically a civilian. In 2323, the battle for Earth began. General Ji Zhao, Supreme Commander of the Defense Forces, engaged the Harappans. Outnumbered and desperate, Earth tried to repel the invaders. After settling on Belbos, the new Republic administration began a counteroffensive with the assistance of Bronteroc fleets. Beta Stefani in the northeast was captured, and human armies were brought in to relieve the siege of Othana III. In 2324, after months of fighting on Earth and over 1 billion dead, the military high command collapsed. Earth had fallen. The final soldiers had died, and the remaining conscripts were now surrendering en masse. Across the Republic, their defeat was widely acknowledged. However, on the new capital, on Belbos, the President refused to admit that the Republic had lost. 2 years later, the Senate on Belbos voted in a 2/3 majority to place the blame for the defeat firmly with the Admiralty. As a result, all remaining members of the military high command were executed. They were called deserters and killed under their own no-retreat directive, regardless of whether they had been in an engagement or not. Publicly, the President still refused to admit that the Republic had been defeated. Privately, Republic envoys surrendered to the Harappans unconditionally. The Sol system then became a Harappan protectorate. In 2327, Ji Yang permanently dissolved the barely established Senate on Belbos and named herself Lord Protector of the Free Human Republic, a position that apparently required a lifetime commitment. Nationalistic zeal swept through the Republic as the Lord Protector used her firm grip on media outlets to broadcast a constant message of hatred towards the Harappans. The Lord Protector's National Preservation Party was now ruling with an iron fist. Only 6 months after becoming the Lord Protector, the Free Human Republic was renamed the New Hegemony of Belbos by Ji Yang, with Belbos as the new capital. Praise Belbos. Due to a massive oversight by the diplomats of the New Hegemony of Belbos, Health, Happiness and Hedonism, and the benevolent interstellar flock, the Harappan Empire was declared a crisis by the galactic community in 2328. This machination came at the hands of the Nuta archivists as a potential way to stop the Empire's ongoing aggression. A little bit too late, one might say. But now, the galaxy had formally declared war against the Harappan Empire, even though a hard-fought peace had just been achieved. Behind closed doors, the Nuta also assured the Empire that they would not be prosecuting this war, and all borders with Nutan vassals would remain safe. On Belbos, the Lord Protector rejoiced, feeling assured that in the chaos of this punitive war against the Harappans, she could quietly reclaim the Earth, and thus began a costly rearmament program. In 2331, military robots were commissioned to swell the ranks of the re-envisioned military, as after the fall of Earth, there were now too few humans left in the new hegemony of Belbos to fully replenish the armed forces. In fact, Matok now vastly outnumbered humans in the hegemony, along with other alien elements like the Plebals and the Belbos. The most gracious Lord Protector also announced that year that the parent protocols would be rewritten to become more human. These documents would be dubbed the Overlord Codex. Whilst unpopular, this set of laws proved to be a far more effective governing system than the parent protocols, and became widely accepted as the baseline of this autocratic nation's constitution. In a surprising move by the Lord Protector, Evelyn Braith was appointed as Speaker of the Lord Protector in 2332. Her role made her the Chief Propaganda Officer of the new hegemony of Belbos. This was seen as a confusing move for the Lord Protector to make, as her late father, Senator Ed Braith, was put on trial for treason against the Old Republic alongside Senator Max Still. Although the president at the time, Guy Gagney, had issued Evelyn's father with a pardon, to that day, she had struggled to put her tarnished history behind her. Yet with this new position, she received all the advantages that came from being a member of the dictator's inner circle. This included diplomatic immunity from a majority of hegemony law. Private diplomatic negotiations with the Harappans broke down. After months of attempting to persuade the Harappans to surrender the Earth Protectorate, which was cut off from any Harappan supply lines and deep within hegemony space, the Lord Protector's diplomats, finally growing tired, issued an ultimatum. Surrender the Earth or we will nuke it into dust. The Harappans again refused. In a tense exchange, it was reported that a hegemony diplomat told the Harappan ambassadors to shove a neutron launcher up their thrusters, which led to blows between the diplomats. This insult may be the spark that caused the sanctioned crisis war against the Harappans to finally heat up, going from a Cold War to something much, much hotter. Though many analysts now argue that this was only an excuse by the warmongering hegemony government to attack the Harappans once more and reclaim Earth, no matter the cost. Symbolism was clearly very important to the Lord Protector. By 2333, the Free Trade Zone diplomats to the galactic community finally became aware of Nuta plans to install themselves as community president and then grant their term emergency powers, far outside the normal scope of the galactic community's reach. On the pretense of the apparent galactic crisis, the Harappans, and with Earth's diplomats quietly following the Nuta agenda, the rest of the galaxy was fearful of both the Harappans and the Nuta, and a majority supported this amendment. After massive rearmament, the hegemony's economy was on the brink of collapse. The Lord Protector then begged for money and assistance from HHH and the benevolent interstellar flock. Luckily, their allies agreed to step in and help again, in the name of the joint war effort, and send aid. With the Nuta archivists installing themselves as the self-styled galactic custodians in 2334, their first act was to declare war on the Commonwealth of Soil, labelling them the true threat to the galaxy because they blocked the Nuta from access into Harappan space. Privately, the Nuta once again reassured the Harappans that they had no intention of actually invading Harappan space, though the Harappans were beginning to become very skeptical of their promises. In 2335, the new hegemony of Belbos dropped hundreds of thousands of guerrilla fighters onto the Earth, in order to weaken the massive Harappan defensive installations now present there. Once more, the Harappans launched a full-scale invasion from the wormhole in Torfi's star, this time with an even larger fleet than before. They quickly pushed through and into Othana, where the new hegemony had stationed a preliminary defensive force. This force was primarily composed of Nuta mercenaries, but in a stunning defeat, all of the mercenaries were killed or fled. Some reports of the battle instead suggest that the mercenaries stood down and let the Harappans advance, before returning to Nuta space unmolested. Given how events unfolded across the galaxy in the following decades, it seems likely that this was in fact the reality of the situation. Regardless, spirits remained high in the hegemony's high command. Some even looked at the positive side of their defeat in Othana, as that does save them some money. Overall, the Battle of Othana was a complete loss. The new hegemony of Belbos then prepared their next line of defense to repulse the Harappans. In 2339, the benevolent interstellar flock committed mass suicide and replaced their now dead population with an army of near identical machine automatons. These cyber-synthetic bodies claimed to be a continuation of the Bronterok species, possessing the memories and traits of the entire species before their suicide. But many across the galaxy fiercely disagreed. The Nuta, the galactic custodians, issued threats and warnings to the new hegemony of Belbos for their association with the Bronterok. By 2340, the already unhinged and substance-addicted Lord Protector had reportedly suffered a full mental breakdown as her allies began turning against her. The citizens and some factions within the hegemony began to call for the Lord Protector's replacement. This rhetoric was harshly put down by the Speaker of the Lord Protector and her minions. Meanwhile, General Roman Dragomirov, commanding the invasion of Earth, died. It was reported that he fought valiantly, and even in the face of death, he did follow procedure, filling the correct forms in order to jump 200 feet into the air and scatter himself over a wide area. However, this would not signal a defeat for the new hegemony. After 6 years of escalating engagement on the Earth, in 2341, the Lord Protector claimed victory. as she once more walked upon the cradle of humanity, shielded from the now constant harsh radiation storms and violent bursts of acid rain by force fields. Many were left wondering how long the hegemony could hold the planet. The single-mindedness of their campaign, pouring all of the resources of the hegemony into retaking Earth and ignoring all other battlefronts, may have in fact cost them the war. Harappan forces that had pushed through the northern wormhole were now once again at Sirius. Human forces had retreated to Earth in the hope of defending the planet in one final stand. It is thought that the Lord Protector was expecting further assistance from her allies in the HHH and robotic benevolent interstellar flock, along with support from the rest of the community. However, that support never materialized. Only a few months later, the fleets above Earth were defeated. Again, Ji Yang retreated from the planet and issued the Emergency Defense Act. She claimed that the new hegemony would fight for every molecule on the planet. In 2342, the Lord Protector's inner circle called out her clear and near constant state of intoxication due to substance abuse. Some have suggested that with the loss of the war and under the weight of her apparent failure for a second time, she fell into the dark trap of substance abuse to numb the pain of this failure. Many beers lost their life that day. The cowardice movement was established in 2344 amidst a vote to sue for peace. The Lord Protector called her upper council and over half of the public cowards. This label was then worn proudly, and it became popular amongst the public to wear buttons saying "I am a coward" and "better a coward than dead." Ji Yang's iron grip on the hegemony was beginning to slip. The next year, Earth surrendered for a second time. The Lord Protector made no public statements on this event. On Belbos and across the new hegemony worlds still under her control, any news of current affairs was violently suppressed. 3 years later, in 2348, after much debate in the galactic community, the Nuta finally managed to repeal the crisis legislation, and the war against the Harappans came to an end. The Nuta then claimed that in order to prevent such a bureaucratic travesty as the Crisis War from repeating itself, they did require additional powers to safeguard sentient life across the galaxy. A majority of the community supported this reformation, in the hopes of securing a lasting peace. The Nuta archivists then established the Galactic Empire, a rebranding of their now extensive and permanent emergency powers. Meanwhile, the Harappans established the Earth Restoration Project, a science directorate with the sole task of restoring Earth to the garden it once was. At present, the previous paradise is in fact a desolate tomb world. Centuries of industrial pollution and decades of modern warfare had reduced the planet to an inhospitable wreck, with life outside of the shielded cities completely impossible. Restoring this world would be a daunting task. Far away on Belbos, the now self-styled Empress Ji Yang, Empress of the new hegemony of Belbos, refused to acknowledge that anything was wrong, or in fact that Earth was even lost. She continued to refer to that area of space and the Earth Restoration Project as the Sol Satrapy. Removing herself from public life, the NHB continued on without its western space, and claimed to be a direct continuation of the old hegemony of Belbos. The Matok Free States, on the far edge of hegemony space, then managed to remain free of any external control save the Newton Emperor. In fact, they even attempted to pay the Harappans their tribute, but the Harappans were only confused, not understanding the intentions of the Matok envoys and their previous subservient relationship within the hegemony. Taking advantage of the situation, the Matok instead claimed that it was all one big translation error, handed over a few of their personal items, such as a clipboard and some shoes, as gifts, and left as quickly as possible. Would the freedom of the Matok people last? And what would the future hold for this galaxy, with peace balanced on the edge of a knife? This concludes our analysis of the fall of the Free Human Republic in this timeline. Please refer to the next chapter of this report for further details on the Belbos Timeline. The Ministry of Timelines bears no official responsibility for the content of this research. The actions of our erstwhile temporal cousins shows that even in the darkest of times, with reality collapsing, there is always a path to victory. One simply has to know where to apply appropriate pressure. The Earth Restoration Project was established by the Harappan Empire as a protectorate in the ashes of the new hegemony of Belbos. Its sole purpose to restore the Earth to the paradise of Harappan legend. Far away on Belbos, the insane Emperor clung on to a fraction of her former power, lamenting the loss of Earth and her sister colonies. The Harappans reorganized the trade system of the Earth Restoration Project, which until that point had been plagued by the corruption inherent in the systems created by the Plebals, which had unfortunately been carried across into the Earth system. It was with much relief that the energy credit deficit, thought to be a necessary side effect of the trade system, turned into a surplus. It could not have been a coincidence, therefore, when a fleet of pirates appeared in the Othana system within the year, disrupting the trade reforms. Rumours flew of plebal interference, almost certainly funded by HHH, upset at Earth's new prosperity. The trade reforms reinvigorated the Earth Restoration Project. Flush with energy credits, the project sought the next step to improve the quality of life for Earth, and struck deals for both food and consumer goods. The Harappans were happy to assist, with a touch of buyer's remorse setting in once the digital ink had dried. It seemed that centuries of working with the Plebals had influenced how humanity crafted special trade deals. Year 2353 began with a big day, the first Overseer Council on the Restoration of Earth. Representatives from the Harappan Empire even made the journey to Earth, but it was not an auspicious visit. The Harappan representatives were predominantly concerned about the apparent lack of progress with the project. The leaders of the project reassured the Harappans that their cash was being well spent, although the visiting delegation was very much disappointed to see that none of it had been spent on a complimentary spa treatment, and left Earth with greasy T-zones. Diplomats of the Earth Restoration Project showed they were not to be underestimated with their plebal learnt skills. The diplomats duly followed cues from the Harappans to undermine the leadership of the false Emperor in the galaxy, giving the desired impression of loyalty that paid off the following year, when the Harappans found they had been hasty in signing what turned out to be a larger national subsidy for the Earth than intended. Along with an updated vassalage agreement, Earth's economy was now stronger than ever. The start of 2356 saw the ERP enter diplomatic talks with HHH, who were plotting the downfall of the Galactic Empire, to the surprise of absolutely no one. Nothing practical was achieved, much to the satisfaction of all diplomats present, fostering a framework of mutual support, should the leaked plebal documents prove reliable. A power surge in the centre of HHH space, detected across the galaxy barely 3 months later, suggested otherwise. The creation of a supranational committee was established to oversee this anomaly. The Anomaly Committee held meeting after meeting, finally breaking their silence when the Earth Restoration Project announced that they were the defenders of the galaxy. The anomaly itself, however, remained a mystery. Even when ships started to be spat out of it into regular space, they were not considered more than merely unbidden, a moniker coined by the Earth media to dismiss them as any kind of threat. pleas for help and galactic support from health, happiness and hedonism were not taken seriously, for obvious reasons. Months passed. More reports from HHH that these unbidden were attacking. More ambivalence came from the committee that HHH could be telling the truth for once. Any evidence presented was visually unclear and merely showed Triple H ships in the midst of an attack. In the midst of their defense was their counter-argument. The committee said "fool me once" and left it at that. All until the middle of 2358, when the unbidden entered human space for the first time. The media was wrong. HHH was right. Even a stopped doomsday clock is right once an epoch, after all. Discussions rapidly turned to where the galaxy would make its last stand. With the unbidden crisis unfolding across the galaxy, Imperial successionists decided to seize what they thought was an opportunity. But they only added to the threat and general state of panic in the galaxy as they started a civil war. Earth joined the rebels, led by the Harappan Empire, only for the Harappans to withdraw their fleets from Earth territory, despite assurances to the contrary. Earth feared it would not be able to defend itself. The coward and one-time scientific advisor Dita Jethra sued for peace, urging surrender, only for the Harappan fleet withdrawal to scupper his idea. The Harappans made an official statement that the unbidden would not be considered a problem unless they breached Empire borders. In 2364, the Harappan Empire destroyed an Imperial armada in the Battle of Beta Stefani, the largest engagement in the Civil War to date. Meanwhile, the Earth urged the Galactic Empire to reconsider sending more support. The accountants of the Emperor, light years from the front lines of Earth, were not amused. The unbidden continued their assault, entering Evius. The Earth Restoration Project pushed to alert status Puce. Amongst the chaos, there was some celebration, as the re-terraforming of Earth was partially completed. Earth was saved, and all mere years before humanity could potentially be wiped out. Another system fell to the unbidden in 2369, only a decade after they had first appeared. Earth could no longer wait, and sent fleets to engage the unbidden. They were victorious. A glorious victory. It was the first galactic victory against the unbidden, and the media rejoiced, hailing the defenders of the galaxy truly worthy of the name. A second victory came only a year later, when the Earth ships bravely ran away from a large fleet of unbidden, avoiding a viciously skewed engagement that could have then doomed the galaxy. Even stronger unbidden fleets were spotted only a few months later, entering the Monarchadia system, and it was uncertain whether the Beep Boop synthetics would join the battle in time. The year 2371 brought dire news, as Beep Boop lost their armada en route to Earth due to logistical issues, understood to be euphemistic for a hyper-relay snafu. Earth was left without allies. Stoking the flames, the Emperor refused status quo peace and purged the great nest of the synthetic Bronterok with a massive energy assault tuned specifically to destroy synthetic and artificial beings. Few tears were shed for the synthetics in the media, who reported them as not really being alive in any real sense in the first place. Vengeance came only months later, as the neuter colossus of the Galactic Emperor was destroyed above Sol, to the combined might of the Earth Defense Forces and the Harappans. Peace was mooted, with the Harappan fleets in range of the capital, but they failed to destroy the following neuter armada. The next year started badly for Earth, as Neuter took command of the space around Sol. The combined force of the Earth and synthetic fleets were not able to withstand the onslaught. Better news came from Alpha Centauri, where the unbidden were forced to retreat by a timely intervention of regrouped synthetic fleets, at first thought to have been routed. The Civil War was thrown into a stalemate between the Nuta Galactic Imperium and the rebels, who were able to gain independence but failed to overthrow the Empress and the Galactic Empire. A report of the Emperor sending an offer for peace could not have come at a more opportune time. The rebellion accepted the status quo as the largest unbidden armada in recorded history was scouted flying on a direct course for Earth. With forces focused on Sol, a splinter fleet of the Unbidden caused an undefended Alpha Centauri to fall, less than a year after it was saved from such a fate. Harappan reinforcements were over 2 years from arriving at Sol at that time. The Unbidden came closer still to Earth. Barnard's star was the next to fall, with neither Emperor anywhere nearby. 4 months passed before the Harappan Empire moved towards the Unbidden, engaging them from the galactic south. 2377 brought curious news of the HHH being backronymed as Humans, exploiting a previously unrecognized loophole to allow plebals to be legally defined as humans and thus protected under the Earth Restoration Project law. The paperwork for this was pristine. In what was called a complete coincidence by the Earth Restoration Project, the next year saw the project leadership unilaterally declare Earth part of the Nuta Galactic Imperium, despite an overwhelming vote against it in the internal committees. Calls for impeachment echoed around the Senate, but the presented paperwork was pristine. 2 years later, in 2379, the Unbidden Armada reached Sol, a previously unimagined military might descending on the birthplace of the human race, and what turned out to be but the first wave of 2. Earth's fleets buckled, leaving Earth, as well as, according to many loud voices, the entire galaxy doomed. With grand irony, it was only 2 months later that the Earth fulfilled its destiny and was transformed into a Gaia world. The true garden was restored. With space above the Earth lost to the Unbidden, terror then came to paradise. Left with little choice, their Harappan overlords fleeing, Earth declared secret fealty to the Galactic Emperor. More systems were lost to the Unbidden, almost wiping out health, happiness and hedonism in their motiveless genocide. The snails lived on only in a habitat on the outskirts of what was once HHH space. They were the last of their species. One system saved was Sol, the Unbidden having left mysteriously of their own accord. The long, costly process of rebuilding began again. The Galactic Emperor came to Earth's rescue finally when Othana was attacked, and the new shipyards that were part of the rebuilding effort were destroyed. They ended the year 2383 defending Barnard's star. The Unbidden were melted by the Emperor's might, the might of the weapons of the Nuta. The new year continued as the old ended. The Unbidden were purged from Monocadia. A true sense the Unbidden would not be seen again grew and grew until by the end of the year, when the Nuta Armada fled from a massive approaching fleet. They promised to regroup and return, but the Nuta lied. The Unbidden again returned to Earth, the planet itself now having their full attention. A full assault began, the calls for help unheard by any overlord. The end of the cradle of human life looked certain, as 2 months of bombardment pockmarked paradise, until utilizing fantastic transportation technology the Earth had not seen before, the Galactic Emperor intervened. But why not Earth's overlord? The Earth Restoration Project made the only sensible decision in the circumstances and voted for independence. The Harappans, their supposed overlord, were entirely unthrilled from whatever distant system they communicated from in safety. Safety from the Unbidden, perhaps, but Earth knew their secretly built fleets now outnumbered the Harappans' own military. They pushed overtly for independence. The Galactic Emperor attempted to purchase Earth's freedom in 2393 for the grand cost of 40,000 units of refined alloys. Many felt this price was an insult, until it was considered that Earth had become more trouble than it was worth. The Harappans perhaps were not bamboozled into an unfair deal, and instead clung on to their overlord status to secure any sized payment, rather than let Earth go free. For nothing. The next 5 years were of relative peace, until in 2398, peace was broken with the return of the Unbidden attacking Earth. The home fleet attempted to flee using new technology, jump drives. This technology was first created by HHH, and rumours abound that it was this technology that first drew the Unbidden to the galaxy in the centre of Triple H space. These rumours were dismissed as hateful speech by the plebels themselves. Then the Unbidden followed the human fleets through their jump, which was, to all scientific minds, a technical impossibility. The sudden reappearance of the Unbidden fleets and the shock that their escape had failed led the Earth's defenders to complete annihilation. Earth was once again defenseless, and beginning to understand its cost, no longer wanted the freedom it thought it had fought for. It now looked to reintegrate into the wider galaxy. The 24th century ended. A new century began. As was customary, the major wars of the time were listed, the cost calculated. The collapse of Belbos, the various Harappan Wars, the Nuta Imperial Rebellion, the Unbidden Crisis. Overall, tens of billions had died in brutal warfare and genocide in the last 200 years. In more positive news, terraforming of Othana 3 into a Gaia world began in 2400, along with the construction of an orbital ring above the planet. The process, perfected on Earth, projected that all worlds in the Earth Restoration Project would eventually be turned into paradise. The project would take a giant leap closer to reality after the Nuta destroyed the Unbidden, the Emperor having kept his promise before the year end and destroying the interdimensional portal. The last remnants of the Unbidden were hunted and destroyed, and an uneasy peace settled across the galaxy. 5 years of stability followed. 2406 saw the synthetics voted out of the Harappan political bloc in order to appease the Galactic Emperor. The Nuta announcing their intentions to eradicate all synthetic life from the galaxy forced the Harappans to realise that the Galactic Emperor's power could not be left unchecked. With the backing of the Earth Restoration Project, plans were made to overthrow the Galactic Emperor and save their synthetic brethren, recognising those who fought bravely during the Unbidden Crisis, although it was acknowledged that open warfare against the powerful Empire would be a mistake at that time. After 4 years of negotiations, the Earth Restoration Project gained nominal independence from the Harappans in 2410. With perfect timing, the project immediately unveiled the culmination of years of research, their insights into terraforming having led to a deep understanding of the process, deep enough to be able to reverse it. A new doomsday weapon was revealed to the galaxy. The message was clear: leave Earth alone, or else. The Second Democratic Human Republic was born. With newfound power came newfound ethics and allies. 3 years after feeling themselves untouchable, 6 years after plotting against the Galactic Emperor, the Second Democratic Human Republic made a deal with that selfsame Emperor behind the backs of the Harappan and synthetics. They were granted a permanent council seat in the Imperial Senate to betray the Rebel Alliance from the inside. Some leaked information, key Imperial intelligence, a few months later suggested that perhaps the Second Democratic Human Republic were walking a dangerous line. In 2413, the Galactic Empire proposed a crusade to wipe out all synthetic lifeforms. Earth managed to delay this crusade, using their practiced legal teams to tie up the preparations in what looked to be decades of bureaucracy, under the pretense of wanting the paperwork to be proper. Their council powers granted a brief reprieve for the synthetics. Despite their efforts, war erupted 4 months later in 2414 between the Harappan Empire and the Nuta Galactic Imperium. Both sides claimed in diplomatic channels that they started it, neither side would stop it, and Harappan fleets burned. Earth considered playing both sides of the conflict, not realizing their ally the Harappans were almost destroyed, saved only when Beep Boop declared a separate war on the Galactic Imperium. A second declaration was transmitted minutes later claiming a translation error, and could they please only be at war with the Nuta, not the entire Galactic Empire. This was declined, the Imperium only too happy for synthetics to accidentally declare war on the Empire, which meant a war against the Second Democratic Human Republic. War against everyone. A year of war found the Earth fleets dispersed by the middle of 2415. Unable to withstand the Empire or help their allies, they scattered to stay alive. It was around this time that the Earth found out Ji Yang, the coward, was dead. The new hegemony of Belbos had a new emperor, a paper role for a paper empire, still clinging on in the old hegemony space to a handful of worlds, and now subject to the Galactic Nuta Imperium. Earth's desperate begging for economic support was heard by HHH at the start of 2416. Triple H briefly cited the numerous previous bailouts that had not so far resulted in economic stability, before focusing on Earth's immediate policy of the previous 50 years, which directly led to the vilification of the plebeian people. Earth could not recall suggesting that the Unbidden were no threat, or that Triple H were responsible for their appearance, or even that their response to Triple H's calls for assistance were anything but immediate. Nevertheless, HHH emphatically rejected Earth's pleas. 2417 saw the synthetics lose another fleet to the Nuta Emperor. Who would stop him? It would not be the Second Democratic Human Republic, not with their economy on the brink of collapse. Yet they announced victory was within their grasp. Announced to who though? The galaxy was ignoring them and their puffed up propaganda. The galaxy did pay attention 15 months later when the Second Democratic Human Republic appeared in Nuta space without having entered it conventionally. All regular intelligence networks were bypassed by the fleet, having circumnavigated the galaxy using wormholes, gateways, and a series of backwater hyperlanes. The Republic immediately demanded the Nuta disband the Galactic Imperium, with the threat that the Grand Archive, what the humans believed to be a key industrial world, would be obliterated by Earth's Colossus. The Nuta surrendered within days, an unexpectedly swift and clean outcome, a result of the humans' choice of target. Unbeknownst to them, in reality it housed the great historical archives and databases of the Nuta people, accumulated knowledge that the Nuta simply could not risk to lose. The Galactic Empire, having duly disbanded, finally liberated Earth from foreign powers, and so they looked inwards to a domestic tyrant. The rebel power bloc, led by the Harappans, was reformed as the Greater Human Republic by the end of the year. Earth used their power of paperwork, mastered over decades, to quietly and quickly take over this new political grouping, promising to bring, if not freedom and democracy to all, then at least representation to some. The Nuta joined the Greater Human Republic 2 years later, having initially created the Empire to ensure a steady stream of information and people from the rest of the galaxy, and seeing that they could continue to do that whilst operating within the Republic. The Synthetics refused the Nuta's admission at first, but were as keen to see peace within the galaxy as the others. They even agreed to wear flesh masks to meetings, on the proviso that no one asked where the flesh came from. The Nuta archivists and all their vassals then joined the Greater Human Republic, once they were assured of key voting rights to enable their continued work on their archives. The benefits were mutual, the archivists getting access to Harappan information that they had until now lacked, and could not get in any other way. The Nuta set up a project to penetrate the mysterious past of the Harappans and humanity in general. The results would not reveal themselves quickly. Humans had now placed themselves as key members in the most powerful galactic interstellar organization. Within months of galactic peace, human spies were reported to have found within the Ospranian Shard, a xenophobic fallen empire, weapons of mass disintegration so powerful and destructive that at a moment's notice the galaxy could be laid low. The refusal of the Shard to join or even treat with the Greater Human Republic resulted in the entire galaxy, at the insistence of the Second Democratic Human Republic, declare a preemptive war on the Shard. Total war fell on this fallen empire. Peace was finally within arm's reach. The fallen empire fell a second time in the year 2424, the last major power that was not part of the Greater Human Republic was gone. And with that, a new era dawned. This concludes our analysis of the path to victory for humanity in this timeline. With their complete supremacy over the galaxy and the defeat of the extra-universal threat, no further worthwhile data can be extracted from the timeline beyond this point. The analysis of further divergent timelines will be required to preserve the prime timeline.